The air in the Galactic Dominion war chamber was thick with arrogance. Towering Zy'karian warlords, their reptilian scales gleaming under the artificial lights, stood in a semicircle around a single frail figure, a human, old and hunched, clad in a simple Earth military jacket. His silver hair and worn face betrayed a lifetime of battles, yet the alien saw only fragility. Laughter erupted as Commander Vorok, a 7-foot-tall Zy'karian, stepped forward, arms crossed over his massive chest. His deep voice rumbled through the chamber. "This is the warrior Earth sends to advise us? An ancient bag of bones." His subordinates chuckled, sharp teeth glinting in amusement. Arthur Cain didn't flinch. His weathered fingers tapped idly against the hilt of a walking cane, a movement slow, deliberate. His eyes, sharp despite his age, swept across the room, taking in every detail: the exits, the positioning of the warlords, the layout of the battle maps projected in the air. He had done this before, in another time, another war. "You done?" Arthur's voice was quiet, but it cut through the laughter like a blade. Vorok smirked, towering over him. "Do you even understand war, human? The Dominion has fought for millennia. Your kind is new to the stars, still learning to crawl." Arthur exhaled, shaking his head. "War isn't about how long you've been fighting, son. It's about how well you learn from it." Another burst of laughter. One of the younger Zy'karians, eager to impress his superior, sneered. "And what would a creature who can barely stand teach us about battle?" Arthur looked up at him, unblinking. "Surviving." The room grew quiet, the laughter dying off as something in the old man's tone unsettled them. The warlords were used to boasting, to flaunting their physical superiority. They had expected defiance, even anger. But not this calm certainty. A holographic projection of the Dominion's outer colonies flickered into view. The briefing was supposed to be routine, a formality. The Zy'karians had crushed dozens of enemies before. Another war. Another victory. But the projection shifted, displaying the encroaching fleets of the Krax Dominion, warships dark as the void, their movements calculated, precise. Vorok waved a clawed hand dismissively. "The Krax are brutes, nothing more. They think themselves tacticians, but against our might, they will break. As all others have." Arthur studied the map, his gaze narrowing. The Dominion's fleet formations were wrong, sloppy, overconfident. He tapped a single wrinkled finger against a key sector, where the Dominion had massed their strongest ships. "You're baiting them," he murmured. Vorok raised an eyebrow. "Of course. They will strike here, where they believe we are weakest." "They will strike," Arthur agreed. His voice was disturbingly neutral. "And then they'll crush you." The room stiffened. A low growl rumbled from one of the younger warlords. "Mind your tongue, human." Arthur ignored him, eyes fixed on the battlefield map. He had seen this before, years ago, in another war, against an enemy just as cunning. The Zy'karians assumed brute strength alone would win them the fight. The Krax had already seen through it. "You're overextended," he continued. "Your forces are clustered too tightly. A good commander won't hit your center. They'll slip around, flank you. Cut off your retreat." He motioned to several weak points the Zy'karians had overlooked. "Here, here, and here. You're walking into a trap." Vorok let out a derisive snort. "You assume they are capable of such tactics." Arthur's expression remained unreadable. "I assume they've studied you as well as I just did." Silence. The warlords shifted, their confidence shaken. Arthur turned, moving toward the exit with slow, measured steps. "Mock me if you want," he said over his shoulder. "Laugh at my age, my body. Doesn't matter. When the war starts, when your ships burn and your soldiers fall, you'll remember this moment. And you'll wonder if maybe, just maybe, you should have listened to the old man." He left without another word. Behind him, the warlords exchanged uneasy glances. The first distress signal arrived within hours. Then another. And another. Reports flooded in, entire Dominion fleets wiped out, outposts obliterated before they could mount a defense. The Krax Dominion wasn't launching reckless assaults. They were dismantling the Zy'karians piece by piece. Vorok stood in the war chamber, fists clenched, staring at the shifting battle map. Red markers, Krax victories, spread like a slow infection across the Dominion's borders. How? His voice was tight, disbelieving. They should have been crushed. A communication officer hesitated before responding. They're avoiding direct confrontations, sir. Striking supply lines. Cutting communication relays. Using asteroids for cover. Arthur Cain leaned against a console in the corner of the room, arms crossed. He said nothing, but his expression spoke volumes. Vorok turned on him, eyes blazing. You knew. Arthur exhaled. I guessed. The Zy'karian slammed a clawed fist against the console, denting the metal. Then why didn't you warn us? Arthur met his glare without flinching. I did. The room fell into a tense silence. Officers, previously dismissive of the human, now looked at him with uncertainty. He had predicted this. Every detail. And they had laughed. Vorok growled, turning back to the map. We need to regroup. Send reinforcements to... The chamber doors burst open, and a battered officer stumbled inside, blood seeping from a deep gash along his side. His armor was scorched, half melted. They're here. His voice was hoarse, broken. The Krax fleet, they've bypassed the outer colonies. They're attacking the capital. Shock rippled through the room. The Zy'karian homeworld was the heart of the Dominion, its defenses unmatched. If the Krax were already there, it meant one thing. They had been outplayed. Vorok's command mask cracked, his posture stiff with barely controlled panic. He turned to his generals. Deploy every available warship. We will crush them here. Arthur sighed, rubbing his temple. You're about to make another mistake. The warlords turned to him, their previous mockery replaced by something colder. Suspicion. Desperation. Arthur pushed off the console and limped toward the holographic map, adjusting the projection. You rush in now, you'll play right into their hands. The Krax aren't fighting for a single decisive battle. They're bleeding you dry. The moment you commit your entire fleet, they'll pull back, stretch your forces even thinner, and hit you from a direction you aren't expecting. Vorok's voice was low. And what would you have us do? Surrender. Arthur shook his head. You don't have time for pride. What you need is a strategy. He gestured at the fleet formations, the weak points. You're still thinking like warriors, not soldiers. This isn't about strength. It's about positioning. Logistics. Adaptation. A younger warlord snarled. And you expect us to take orders from you? Arthur's gaze hardened. I expect you to decide whether you want to win this war or die clinging to your arrogance. The chamber fell silent. Outside, the distant tremors of orbital bombardment rumbled through the walls. Vorok inhaled sharply. For the first time in his life, he was uncertain. He had spent decades proving his strength in combat, leading victories across the galaxy. But this war wasn't like the others. The Krax weren't stronger, they were smarter. And the only one who had seen it coming was the old human. Finally, through gritted teeth, he spoke. What do you need? Arthur gave a small nod. First, stop reacting and start thinking. You need fallback points. You need decoys. You need contingency plans. He pointed to key locations on the map. Pull your forces back here, here, and here. Give them ground, but only enough to make them overextend. Vorok hesitated. It went against every instinct he had. Retreat. Surrender territory. It was unthinkable. Arthur saw the doubt and leaned in slightly. His voice was quiet, firm. In 1944, I fought in France. We let the enemy think they were winning. Let them get comfortable. Then we closed the jaws on them so fast they never saw it coming. His fingers curled into a fist. That's what we do here. Vorok studied him for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, he gave a single nod. Do as he says. The officers hesitated only briefly before scrambling into action. Orders were relayed, fleets repositioned. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was all they had left. Arthur watched the warlords move, his expression unreadable. He had spent decades away from battle, away from command. He had hoped never to return to it. But war, it seemed, had found him once again. The first Krax assault came at dawn cycle, their warships descending on the capital like a swarm of locusts. The Dominion fleet, battered but reorganized, held the line. For now, Arthur Cain stood in the command center, watching the battle unfold through shifting holographic projections. Every decision counted. Every second mattered. Enemy forces moving to Sector 12, an officer reported. They're probing for weaknesses. Arthur tapped the console, adjusting the display. They won't find any. Not anymore. Days ago, the Zy'karians had been a brute force army, predictable, overconfident. But under Arthur's direction, they had adapted. Defensive positions had been rearranged, fallback points established. The Krax thought they were fighting the same Dominion they had been dismantling. They were wrong. A warning siren blared. Another officer turned, panic in his voice. The Krax flagship is repositioning. They're avoiding our main fleet. Arthur's lips curled slightly. Of course they are. The Krax commander thought he was clever. He was committing forces away from the main battle, aiming for what he believed was an exposed flank. But Arthur had seen this before. The enemy was walking straight into a kill zone. Vorok paced behind him, restless. Are you sure about this? Arthur didn't look away from the display. You want to win? Vorok's jaw clenched. Yes. Then watch. The moment the Krax fleet pushed into the weak sector, hidden Dominion warships emerged from the dark side of a shattered moon. They fired in coordinated waves, shredding the enemy's vanguard before they had time to react. What was supposed to be a surprise assault turned into a slaughter. Vorok's eyes widened. They never saw it coming. Arthur allowed himself a brief nod. No, they didn't. The Krax weren't just losing ships, they were losing cohesion. Their formations fractured, their command structure buckling under the sudden, unexpected resistance. They had relied on Dominion stupidity. But that weakness had been burned away. They're pulling back, an officer called out. Orders. Arthur's voice was calm. Let them. Vorok snapped his head toward him. Let them. We have the advantage. Arthur turned. And if you push now, you'll overextend. Just like they did. Realization dawned. Vorok inhaled sharply, nodding. We hold. The Krax scrambled to regroup, confused by the Dominion's newfound discipline. They expected reckless retaliation. Instead, they found a force that knew exactly when to strike, and when to wait. Another alarm flared. A technician turned in his seat, eyes wide. Krax reinforcement fleet incoming. 5 minutes out. Arthur checked the map. He had anticipated this. The Krax wouldn't accept defeat easily. They would double down. We're not done yet, he muttered. The final phase was already in motion. While the battle raged in orbit, he had ordered ground defenses to shift. The capital wasn't just being defended, it was being prepared. The city streets had been turned into layered choke points. Buildings reinforced. Civilian zones repurposed into fallback positions. It was an old strategy, one he had seen work in countless wars before humanity had ever left Earth. Urban warfare. The Krax didn't expect it. When their ground forces landed, they anticipated a broken, disorganized defense. Instead, they found disciplined kill teams moving through the streets, using shadows and structure to turn every block into a battlefield. Vorok watched the reports come in, shaking his head. They were stronger than us. Faster than us. And we beat them. Arthur took a slow breath. His body ached, old wounds whispering their reminders. He had spent his youth fighting wars for a world that had long since forgotten them. Now, in a distant galaxy, those same lessons had won a battle against an empire. He turned to Vorok. The war isn't over. The Zy'karian nodded, something new in his gaze. Respect. But this battle is. The Krax, realizing they had lost the element of surprise, finally retreated. Their once relentless advance shattered, their aura of invincibility gone. The old soldier exhaled. That's how you win a war. The silence after the battle was almost unnatural. The capital still stood, scarred but unbroken. Wreckage littered the skies, drifting remains of a fleet that had once seemed unstoppable. The Krax had fled, but the war was far from over. Arthur Cain sat on a reinforced crate in the command center, rubbing his aching knees. His body protested every movement, but his mind was sharp as ever. He had been through worse. Vorok stood nearby, staring at the battle map. The Zy'karian warlord had changed. The arrogance was still there, but now it was tempered with something else, understanding. "We have them on the back foot," Vorok said, his voice measured. "We should press the advantage." Arthur studied him. Days ago, the Zy'karian had mocked the idea of strategy beyond brute force. Now he was thinking like a commander. "You should," Arthur agreed. "But not recklessly." Vorok exhaled sharply. "Then what do you suggest?" Arthur gestured toward the map. "The Krax don't expect you to chase them. They expect you to regroup, to rebuild. If you move now, before they stabilize, you can dictate the next battle." One of the war officers hesitated. "You want us to invade their space?" Arthur's gaze didn't waver. "I want you to make them afraid." The room was silent. 4 years, the Dominion had fought through brute strength alone. Now, for the first time, they were considering something else, psychological warfare. Vorok's claws tapped against the metal console. "Where do we strike?" Arthur leaned forward. "Their supply lines. Their shipyards. Their command centers. Don't go for their core worlds, not yet. You need to bleed them first." Another officer frowned. "We don't have the numbers to sustain a prolonged assault." "You won't need to," Arthur countered. "You don't fight to conquer. You fight to break them. Hit fast. Disappear. Make them paranoid. Make them doubt their own strength." Vorok's eyes gleamed with understanding. "Make them fight like we used to." Arthur nodded. "Exactly." A murmur spread through the command staff. This was a different kind of war than they had ever fought. A war of attrition, of disruption. It was new. Uncomfortable. But after what had happened, they were willing to listen. Vorok straightened. "We move at dawn cycle." He turned to Arthur, his expression unreadable. "Will you stay?" Arthur considered it. He had done what he came to do. The Dominion was no longer helpless, no longer blind to the realities of war. He could leave now. Let them fight their own battles. But something in Vorok's gaze made him pause. The Zy'karian had changed, yes, but not enough. Not yet. Arthur let out a tired breath. "For a little while." Vorok nodded. No more mockery. No more doubt. Just respect. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, the Dominion wasn't fighting to survive. They were fighting to win.